Bible teacher, I want to teach on the whole book of John, which I've done in this room. It took almost a year to get through it. Just this one chapter 6 is 71 verses, but yet it covers only a little over 24 hours. We're not going to cover all 71 verses. We're only going to cover one today. 6:35. I am the bread of life. What does that mean? What did Jesus mean when he tried to convey that image to you and me, to explain who he is and what he came for? To begin with, I think it's helpful for us to deal with this phrase, quote, I am. Clearly it is Yahweh. But also, he reminds us that it's personal. Sometimes we make God into something he's not. He's not the bread. He's not a gate. He's not a shepherd. Those are images of who he really is. He's a person. Powerful, loving person. So Jesus is saying, I'm personal. The phrase also has a critical element in the Greek, in the original language. It is present tense. In fact, the tense is interesting because it's an ongoing tense. He's saying, I'm not only personal, I'm present. I'm present in that chair right now if you choose me to be there. Jesus is always present when you and I feel like he's not around. It's because you and I moved. Not because he moved. He's present. He's personal. We can have a relationship with him, that we can call him friend, he says. And if we're wise, we'll call him Lord. Because he gives us advice. That when we follow his advice, it leads to blessings. So he's personal. Also, this tense means something amazing. It implies continuum. If we go all the way back to the very first verse in John 1:1, I think we have it. It reads, in the beginning, before the Big Bang, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Jesus was with God, and the Word was God. Christ Jesus is the Word, the nourishment. Then he's telling this crowd that he's speaking to, these words were amazing of who he is. Then he gets even more detailed in the next slide. He said in John 8:58, very truly I tell you, Jesus answered them, before Abraham, before the founder of our nation, I am. There's no mistake. If that wasn't powerful enough, he tells them in chapter 10, I and my Father are one. Pretty clear who Jesus said he was. Not so clear who we think he is. Who do we say he is? You know, we go back to I am the bread of life. Let's pull that back up. So we have understanding a bit about the I am, how powerful it is. The issue becomes, for us today in 6:35, what does he mean, the bread of life? In order to get a flavor for that and dig into the bread, we need to kind of have the context. A Bible teacher never can teach Scripture without giving you something called hermeneutics, which simply means to understand the plot, if you will, the characters. What happened before, what happened after, what is the timelines, what is the motivation of the folks that we're studying. Let's kind of look at that very briefly. Jesus is speaking, as I said, he's in a town called Capernaum. It's early in the morning, and the preceding day, he was over on the other side of the lake, of the Sea of Galilee. He's traveled during the evening over to Capernaum. Capernaum's a town which is kind of like his home base. He's been driven out of Nazareth, which was his hometown, which is just probably 12, 15 miles down the road. He's speaking to this crowd of people that are literally chasing him. He's at the peak of his ministry, the ministry of Galilee, if you will. He's spent all his time, the last couple of years, he took over the ministry from John the Baptist. And it's mostly a healing ministry. And so, as far as people, this is the peak of thousands that are following him. We know this from John 6:2. A great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs. Always key to look at those words, because. They were following him because. Why are you and I seeking Jesus? Why are they seeking Jesus? Because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. He had this healing ministry. So you can imagine all these folks, a whole hospital of folks, is following him and their families. But there's another reason, a motivation. So those folks had a plan, right? It might not necessarily have been Jesus' plan they're following. They're following their plan. But there's another group of folks in the crowd that had another, quote, agenda. We know from 6:14, it's in your bulletin. When the people saw him do this miraculous sign, they exclaimed, they shouted, "Surely he is the prophet we have been expecting." When Jesus saw that they were ready to what? Force him. Think about that. Force him to be their king, comma, he slipped away into the hills by himself. This happened just before 6:35 that we're going to study in a second. So this group of people saw Jesus as a warrior king. Someone that had come on the scene to basically lead them into, quote, battle against the Romans to give them independence. To restore the time of Solomon when their country was prosperous. And everyone was proud to be an Israelite, to be a Jew. They saw this man as the solution to their challenges in life. What was the miraculous sign that happened just before 6:35? Who knows? Chapter 6, early part of chapter 6. The feeding of the 5,000. That Jesus, the afternoon before, had a crowd of 5,000 men and also women and children, so it must have been much more than 5,000. And he has fed them with fishes and bread. So we'll find that they're also chasing him for more food. Can you imagine what that food tastes like? Jesus is probably a pretty good baker, right? So they're in response to this miracle, they're following him as a future king, warrior king, as a healer, and as a baker. He asked that question in the very first chapter of John. Why are you seeking me? Why are you seeking? John 1:36, actually. He asked this always of many people. His disciples, he asks. It's the question he asks you and me. It's a profound question. Are we seeking him for his wisdom, his companionship, his love? Are we simply seeking him for the blessings that we want? We all want those blessings: financial security, relationships, the best for our children, health, stress, anxiety relief. But Jesus is going to say that I'll give you those, but they begin with something else. They begin with a relationship with me. They begin with the bread. He told a similar crowd on the Sermon on the Mount in all of the books of the gospel. Perhaps Matthew does it best. It's the most lengthy. The book of Matthew covers three chapters, 107 verses. It's the most profound speech that's ever been given on planet Earth. The Sermon on the Mount that begins with the Beatitudes. But in that, he says this in Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those, or blessed are they, who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That our priority is we seek God for His agenda, to be used by Him, versus to use Jesus. There's a difference in heart. Our heart is a motivation of love, wanting to love and find out what He wants us to do for Him, versus always asking Him to do something for us. And when we do that, we're blessed. It says, for they shall be filled. Our souls will be filled with nourishment. And physical blessings. It's just a question of the first in that series of the sermon, the very first words in verse 1 of the sermon starts out, blessed are the poor in what? Spirit. Spirit. Meaning, blessed are the ones that come to me with gratitude and humility. And simply ask, how can I be used? Those are going to be filled. He says the same thing in chapter 6. But seek first His kingdom. Meaning His plan, His agenda, not our plan. And His righteousness, that we want to do right, His right, not our right. It's His rights, not our rights. And then all the physical blessings that we want, in addition to the spiritual. Joy, peace, purpose will be given to you as well. That's what he was trying to teach these people. One of my heroes on this Father's Day especially is a guy by the name of Pastor Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King. You hear a lot about him. Freeways are named after him. But here's some words that we don't hear very much in the secular world today. He prayed this. He said, use me, God. Show me how to take who I am, who I want to be, and what I can do, my capacity that you gave me. And here we go. And use me for a purpose greater than myself. God answered those dreams. He changed the world. Because he didn't seek his will, he seeks God's will. He took his dreams and put them at the foot of Jesus. And then Jesus is the one that made those dreams go far beyond his imagination. Solutions always begin at the foot of Jesus in humility. When we got a problem, he's always the solution. But the first is our attitude. It doesn't begin by telling God what to do. It begins with a motivated heart of love to be used by him. And he'll bless us far beyond our dreams. So we pick up the story. The crowd is chasing him. They finally catch this future king or baker or healer. And Jesus gives them a sermon. And as a kahu, I can tell you, he didn't give a very good sermon. Because at the end of the sermon, most of the people left and they never came back. Can you imagine? He didn't seem to care. I mean, he cared. He loved those people. But he was more concerned about not fulfilling their wishes, because that's insatiable. He knew there's a hole in our heart, in our soul, that only the bread can fill. Because if you try to fill it with all the stuff that we want, it's insatiable. Never going to get filled. We're going to have what's called a parched soul. So his love wanted to fill that, but they didn't want to hear it. So at the end, we're going to see what happens. But he says this to the people. He begins in 8:26. Very truly, I tell you, to the crowd, you are looking for me because you ate the loaves, because you enjoyed the meal yesterday. You want seconds. You're back in line again at a buffet. You're chasing me for, not for me, and not for you, but for your stomach. There's no humble heart. There's no repentance. They're not even looking for his plan. They got their own plan. Then he explains further in the verse just before our text verse of 634. Let's take a look at that. And then we can understand 635. I think we have a slide. The true bread, and we'll come back to this word bread, is fascinating, the meaning. The true bread of God is the one, the I, the personal, Jesus. The true bread of God is the one who comes from where? Heaven. And he, the one, gives life to the world. You don't earn it. It's a gift. It has to be, the bread is sitting on the table, but unless you partake in the bread, it's simply a table decoration. It's like our Bible. It can sit on the shelf, but unless we consume it, it doesn't do any good. So he gives us life, and we must partake. Now let's go back to this word bread. Bread in the Greek literally means meal. Just like the bread in this culture was a staple. It was the main course of a meal. If you didn't have bread, you didn't have a meal. Just like in Japanese or Asian cultures, rice. What does the word gohan mean? It means meal. It means rice, but it also, the kanji means meal. Same thing here. That he's basically saying that the true bread, the meal of God, which if you translate it into Greek, literally means sustenance, nourishment. And what I thought was beautifully miraculous, the secular definition of sustenance from dictionary, look at it. It talks about God. A source of strength, nourishment supplied for the necessities of life, sustaining provision, support living, keeping body and soul together. So when we see that word bread, the same word he uses at the Last Supper, just a few hours before he goes to Calvary, he says, this bread broken for you. It's the same bread, the same sustenance that he gave his body, the bread, to give us life. But we got to stop there and look at that word life, because that's the operative, because this bread has a purpose. The purpose is to give life. And you'd say, life, okay. That means bios in the Greek. There's several words for life. Bios would make sense because you got sustenance, which is nutrition. It's a staple that gives us physical life. And so therefore God gives us physical life, which is in part true, but it's much deeper than that. Scripture is always deeper than you think it is, and the deeper you get, you just go, oh my God, because it's even deeper than I thought. It's like this word sanctification, big fancy word, simply means becoming holy. And the irony of holiness is, as Mother Teresa would tell you, the holier she got, the further away she knew she was from God. Does that make any sense? The more you know God, the deeper he becomes. And the more you know yourself, the more you should be humble. But that word means zoe, Z-O-E, in the Greek, which means spiritual life, not bios. You're getting more. You're getting both. That's the bread that feeds our eternal soul. That's the bread that gives eternal life. He is the nourishment of God, the Father God sent him, the one, to come down from heaven to give us eternal life in the world. That's what he's saying. You know, I was hesitant to, if we look at this next slide, this is what Jesus is really saying. He's telling this crowd and telling you and me, the best this world has to offer, whatever you can dream of, will never satisfy. It'll never give us the nourishment to feed that parched soul. You know, I have a confession to make on this Father's Day. I have a man crush on a guy named C.S. Lewis. So does Pastor Jarrett. He's just a neat guy. 2 PhDs, Oxford and Cambridge. So we both of us nerd out on him and just love to read what he had. He wrote Mere Christianity. Let's just take a look at one. Pull up that slide. He goes, you can't get a cup of tea big enough or a book long enough to suit me. What he's saying is that the physical things of life just don't satisfy. No matter what we get, we want more. He goes on and says something pretty controversial. God cannot give us a happiness, a peace. What? God cannot give you and me happiness? God cannot give you and me peace. That's a theological, doctrinal, correct statement. Because it says, apart from himself. That we ask for happiness and peace and joy and all this stuff we ask for in our prayers. But it doesn't come without God first. Too often we want the stuff, but we don't want the, quote, obligation, the submission of God. There is no good apart from God. We ask for good, but there is no good on this planet Earth apart from God. First we ask for God, and then the good comes. God cannot give us happiness or peace apart from himself. Joy comes from the fruit of the Spirit, not the fruit of man. Because it is not there. There is no happiness, peace, joy apart from God. There is no such thing. That's a heavy statement. Then we'll close with this on Mr. Lewis. He was reflecting and he says, if I find myself a desire which no experience on this planet can satisfy, then the most probable explanation is that it was made in heaven, in another world. A lot of profound statements. Jeremiah said the same thing in the Old Testament. Jeremiah said, it's like the living water is like putting in a cistern, which is basically a bucket, but a cistern that is cracked, which means it never can be filled. When we try to fill our hearts, that void that only God can fill with stuff, it never satisfies. You know, I hesitated to bring up this next example, but I stole it from Pastor Dawn. She's here. Because it struck me several weeks ago when she showed it to us, and I went and looked at it, because it was such a revealing transparency of a human. This person is not necessarily a role model that I'm holding up for anything other than the fact he's a person that most of us guys want to be. You take a look. Anybody know this guy? He's actually got another one of those gaudy rings, right? I think there's 6 of them now. Quarterback Brady. Good-looking guy, beautiful wife, beautiful life, wealthy, successful, beyond measure, Hall of Fame, etc. But what fascinated me about this gentleman, and I don't know Mr. Brady, I don't know his heart, I'm not here to make any negative comments about him, but I do appreciate him for his transparency in an interview he did quite a few years ago. Right after he won the third Super Bowl, 27-year-old quote-unquote kid, and he said something that shocked the sports world. It certainly shocked the interviewer at 60 Minutes when he said it, because it was so beautifully transparent, but in many ways sad. Because Mr. Brady told the world that he was still searching. He was searching to feel that puka in that soul. Here's what he said. There's got to be more than this. He represents a lot of America. A lot of celebrities that get to their dreams and then they find that they're empty. Let's take a look. 30 seconds. Watch Mr. Brady.
Why did I have 3 Super Bowl rings?
Watch the interview or two.
And still think there's something greater out there for me. I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life is... Me, I thank God. It's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27. And what else is there for me?
What's the answer?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew.
Is that sad? You know, the saddest thing is getting your dreams and finding out they're not fulfilling. If I had Mr. Brady in my pastor's office, I would give him the answer. 6:35, John. Let's take a look. Jesus declared, I am the bread. I am what you're searching for, Tom. I am the nourishment, the sustenance, the solution that fills that hole that we're all looking for. That completes you. That addresses the Zoe of life. Whoever comes to me, whoever partakes in that bread, whoever eats that bread, has the courage, the faith, the trust to say, not my will, but your will. Has the humility. Whoever comes to me, the blessing will be they will never go hungry, never be empty. And whoever believes in me, whoever, even a New England Patriot, for you Cowboy fans or whatever, anybody can come partake that bread. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty, never be hungry, never be parched. So what was the reaction of the crowd to this sermon? Much like the crowd of America today. They began, 6:41, they began to grumble about Jesus. Then really sadly, in 6:66, kind of interesting, chapter 6, verses 66, it reads, many of Jesus' followers turned back and would not follow him anymore. They didn't want his agenda. They rejected the bread. Jesus in the next verse turns to his disciples that were gathered also in that group. There's 2 concentric circles, the disciples and then the crowd. And he turns to them and he says this in 6:67, are you also going to leave? He's about ready to go south to Calvary. He's leaving Galilee and go to Jerusalem. And he turns to them and he says, are you going to leave? And God bless Peter. Peter gets a lot of knocks, but Peter answered profoundly with a question, one that we all should ask. Lord, to whom shall we go? If not you, who? what else is going to give us the nourishment of eternal life? A life of dreams, completed by God Himself. That's the question for us today, folks. On this beautiful Father's Day, do you want the nourishment of life? Then partake the bread. God bless you. Aloha.